Hi guys, this is Rusty78609, Central Texas, USA. This is Saturday, August the 12th, and I'm going to do video number 2 of a series about Texas life or living in Texas from 1945 forward. I was born in South Texas in 1945, and a viewer asked me to do some videos related to life in Texas at that time and forward, as best I can recall, and so I'm doing it. And this again is the second video. The first video was titled Texas Life from 1945, and then it just says number 1, and then this will be Texas Life from 1945, brilliantly thought of by me, number 2. Okay, and so in that video I pointed out, we were living on a place called the Toad Place. We had no running water really. We had a little kitchen thing my mother had to pump. No electricity, had outdoor toilet and all that good stuff, or bad stuff depending on your point of view. But that's the way life was for us and a lot of others in South Texas at that time. In 1949, 1950, where we lived there, I don't know how long. I just remember that I was about 4 years old when we moved to another home, nicer place on a hill. Very nice on a hill, actually. It was a beautiful place. You could see everywhere. I mean, we had beautiful views. You could sit on the patio at night or porch. We had a front porch, and I'll describe the home. Basically, it was a semi 3-bedroom, 1-bath. The reason I say semi is my brother and I's room was had been a little greenhouse that was attached to the house, and my daddy, who was a sort of a carpenter, he was actually a pretty good carpenter. He made it into a bedroom for my brother and I, and there was a double bed, and then there was a cot on one side, and I slept on the cot. Well, when we added the cot, I slept on the cot because I didn't like sleeping in the bed with my brother. He was 6 years older than I was, and he used to always pick on me, because he was brutal. He could be brutal, but anyway, that's another story. That's not anything about the life in Central Texas. But to describe the house, pretty simple. We had one. I want to say it was a butane heater, but it must have been propane heater. A Dearborn, I'll never forget that. And my mother used to put a coffee can, even though we didn't drink coffee, a coffee can of water on top of it to keep the air from not being so dry. That's why she did it. That's what I was told. And yeah, apparently it worked. And but it again, it had a little kitchen, had a separate dining room where we had a table large enough for all of us, 6 of us, mother and daddy. And that's funny, we call them mother and daddy, and some people mama and papa, as somebody pointed out, and ma and pa and all that stuff. But anyway, in our case it was mother and daddy. And but anyway, we had 3 sit-down meals every day, all right. We had no television. At that time we didn't have a telephone, but we did get one later. It was an 8-party line, and you actually had to pick the phone up and hold it to your ear and tell the operator the number you wanted to call. And the operator in Kennedy, Texas was my cousin Patsy Sue Tucker. And I'd just say, hey Patsy, I want to talk so-and-so, and she'd plug in something and I'd get to talk to whoever it was. And that's how the phones worked when we finally got one, sometime probably in the early 50s, I'd say. And the house itself, of course, there was a kitchen sink. We had running water in the kitchen, and there was a little hallway to go outside, out the back, and there was a sink there with running water. And then there was my mother had what was called a wringer washer in the very back of that little hallway. There was a little place to have a washing machine, and it was hard work. But anyway, it was better than what she'd had before, I guess. And also, I remember bathing in a number 3 wash tub, and the reason I know it was a number 3 wash tub is because in the very bottom, in the center of the wash tub, there was the number 3. So when I started the first grade, if anybody wanted me to do the number 3, I could write 3 perfectly, because I'd sit there and doodle while Mother was giving me a bath. I can remember that. But anyway, we did have a bathroom. It was a 1-bath home, and it didn't have a shower. all the water pressure was gravity feed, if you understand that, from an old cistern that was about maybe 50 yards from the house, up a little bit, but the tank, the water tank was about, oh, maybe 20 feet off the ground, and then that was where we got the water pressure from. Again, we still had a windmill that pumped the water into that open tank, and again, the birds would fall in it and die, and it was a mess. My brother and I used to clean it out. It was a zero. And of course, we didn't have an underground, well, we had what was called a cesspool for septic, and there was an underground pipe that ran out about, oh, maybe 100 yards, maybe, I'm not going to say that, maybe I'd say 50, 75 yards from the house, and then it broke above ground, and when you flush the toilet, that's where it went. And we called it a cesspool. And but there were outbuildings too at the place we moved to in the early 50s or late. It might have been 49. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. We had a barn, a big barn, 2 levels, upper and lower, and it had some stalls, where we had a milk cow, and later on we had some hogs and so forth. That's another story. And also right next to the barn there was a Quonset hut, and that's where Andreas lived. And this is Andreas right here. Well, let me take this down. This is an old picture of the old Mexican guy that worked for us, Andreas, and he worked for the Swope family for about 40 years. And you can see this is the old Quonset hut here. It had the wooden windows, and those would open out. I don't know that he ever opened them. I know he left the front door of where he lived was open all the time, and in the middle there was a little pot-bellied stove that had a center flue that went up, and that was his heat. He had no running water in there at all. He did all his, quote, ablutions at the windmill. There was a spigot at the windmill, and that's where he took his baths. As far as hot water, I don't think he ever had any. Well, he may have took some back to his Quonset hut and heated it on the stove. I don't know. And nobody in my family knows either. But one of the things we had to do was every morning, or I did normally because I was the youngest, but you'd walk to the back door and you'd say, Andreas, your breakfast is ready, or dinner's ready, supper's ready. In our case, it was breakfast, dinner, and supper. Okay? There was no brunch. But breakfast was the morning meal, dinner was the noon meal, and supper was the evening meal. That's the way we grew up. And so anyway, I'd just say, I'd go to the back door, hey, Andreas, your breakfast is ready, and then he'd walk from his little Quonset hut to our house. Mother always prepared his meal after hours, and she always made him a cup of coffee. That's where the coffee cans came from, I guess. But nobody in my family drank coffee, and what else? But anyway, he had walked so long from that house to our house that there was a trail, just a perfect little trail from our back door right to his little Quonset hut. But he was the caretaker, and he was the guy that showed me the ropes. Okay, I mean, I spent a lot of time with him in my early years, and I learned a lot from that guy. I mean, a lot. And but anyway, but we had that building, of course, the Quonset hut, and then there was a house, a little building off to the, I don't know, one side of our house. I'll say the right side, doesn't matter. But there was a little building there. It had 2 large rooms and a porch, but it was called the smokehouse, and we called it, when we were growing up, we called it the little house. But in the little house on one side, we did smoke meat there occasionally, not often, but we did. And then in the other room was someone that had lived there left there was just all kind of Life magazines and military memorabilia. There was an old flight hat that you put on, and I mean, there was all kind of stuff in there. So that was part of my entertainment, going out there and digging through all that stuff in that building. And but then, of course, we had a milk cow that Andreas used to milk in the mornings. That's where we got our milk. Mother made butter from that. Of course, we raised hogs, and we butchered our own hogs. You usually butchered the hogs in November because it had to be cool enough, so that the meat didn't go bad or whatever. But it had to be cool. You liked it pretty cold. If it was in the 50s, was a good time to butcher. And so we'd butcher some hogs, and we had a big freezer in well, actually, it was in what we call the formal dining room. It really wasn't. It was just another room off our living room, and but there was I mean, it was a big freezer. I mean, a big one, and but it was always full. You know, we butchered our own beef, we butchered our own hogs, we butchered our own chickens, and you know, that thing was full of fresh beef all the time. The only thing we would do sometimes is if we wanted to, we'd take it to town, and they would you know, blend the if Daddy had been deer hunting with my brother. I rarely went deer hunting when I was a kid. I did a couple of times. I didn't care much for it. I didn't. I mean, it wasn't that I didn't want to kill the deer. I'd have killed anything. It didn't matter to me. I just wasn't big on deer hunting because it wasn't much fun to me. I was too young. But having said that, sometimes if we had venison from a deer hunt, then we would mix it with the pork, the hog's meat, and the pork, and make a nice sausage. And I made a lot of sausage because, you know, you take the intestine and put it on the end of this little thing, this machine, and then you push the meat down and you crank it, and it'll fill up that intestine, and then you tie it off and you make sausage links. And so I've done that a lot, and so that was part of the way it was done in South Texas at that time. We also, my mother had a big garden, and you know, when I was younger, I used to help her work in the garden. That was one of my duties, I guess. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. It was a big garden. We had okra, tomatoes, corn. What else? We had onions, all kind of stuff. It was a big garden. It was about, it was probably, I'm going to say 25 yards by 20 yards, in that range. But it produced a lot because we always had a lot of fresh tomatoes and fresh veggies and stuff. And so that's kind of how we grew up. We had a healthy diet. You know, everything was, quote, organic to the max. We never, I don't remember Mother using any spray of any kind on any of the garden stuff. And as far as our crops, you know, we didn't eat the flax or, you know, the cotton, you know what I mean? But now, whenever we planted corn, my daddy always planted about 6 or 8 rows of popcorn. And so we always had plenty of popcorn. Yep, we did. We had plenty of popcorn. And it was just your typical farm life, and it was there. I mean, I didn't realize it was. I didn't know what hard work was. Okay, I mean, if you went out in the sun and sweat, that's just the way it was. You didn't think about it being hard work, and it never. No one ever used those words when I was growing up. It was just what it was. It was the way you survived. And of course, we had tractors, and we had an old John Deere A, John Deere G. We had a Massey Harris tractor, and had 2 combines to combine the flax. And we also had a crop called maize, which is not, you know, maize, and, you know, to the Indians in South America maybe corn, okay, but maize was also a little grain about the size of a, I don't know, about a fifth the size of a green pea. You know, it was called maize, and that was a good crop. But, you know, and what we would do, you know, with the corn and you know, the corn stalks and some of the other stuff, we would feed to the animals, and you know, then we would make our own feed for the hogs, because, you know, later as the hog business kind of grew, I mean, I hated every day of it, but, you know, we had, I don't know, hell, probably 100 head or 200 head of hogs. I mean, a lot. And we had 3 of those big box feeders that the hogs would, you know, lift up the lid and stick their snouts in and eat. And there was 4 openings on each side. And you had to keep those feeders full all the time, and that was a job. You know, you get home from school, you had to back that old pickup up to we had a round aluminum storage bin for the hog feed, and it had an auger, you know, electric auger, and you'd plug in that electric auger and you'd fill up the back of the truck. An auger just moved the grain from the grain tank into the back of the truck. That's all that does. And and then you'd drive the pickup over to the feeder, and then you had to shovel it into the feeder till you got it pretty well full, and then you'd do the same thing. You had 3 feeders. Took about, maybe hour and a half, depending on how slow you worked. But it was work. I mean, but, you know, that was after school. When I got home after school, believe me, there was stuff to do. And, you know, just keeping the water tank filled for the hogs. We had 3 or 4 50-gallon drums, and, you know, of course, with no water pressure, and one little garden hose, that was basically a full-time job right there, because I just turn it on and leave it running while I was doing everything else, and then after 30, 45 minutes it'd fill up one, maybe, and then I'd go to another and then fill it up. And then you also had to keep there was what we called a hog wallow, where you just kept this whole large area just soaking wet, so the hogs could cover themselves with mud and keep cool and stuff. And one thing good about hogs is, they'll go to one corner and poop. So then you could use that for fertilizer. You could use it for a lot of other things. I don't know that we did, but we could have. I don't remember. And but the hog business was tough. That was a lot of work. And again, this was in the early 50s, and I was, by the time I'll move this all the way forward, say to 1955, and I realized this thing's running on a little bit. But there were a couple of things that happened in the 50s, early 50s, that I'll mention. So we'll kind of keep this chronology, year by year. In the early 50s, there was a place in Kennedy called the Friendly Bar, and there was a gambler, a professional gambler, that lived in Kennedy and lived in a beautiful home. And he had a beautiful wife, and his name was Dallas Husky. Dallas Husky was a professional gambler, and how he ended up in Kennedy, I don't know. But anyway, he was a big gambler, and he used to gamble at the Friendly Bar. And a lot of guys used to go there and gamble, because I used to go in there and watch them. And anyway, one Saturday or sometime, I don't know, it might have been any day of the week, we'll just pick Saturday because that sounds good. But he was gambling with a fellow named Duckett. And Larry Duckett, his son, was a good friend of mine, and because we were in the same grade. And anyway, this guy Duckett and Husky, Dallas, named Dallas. You got to know he's a gambler, right? But anyway, Dallas Husky and him were gambling with some other guys, and I don't know what happened. I don't know the whole story. I don't know if Dallas Husky was cheating or whatever. He probably was, since he was a professional gambler, but who knows. But anyway, something happened, and Duckett called his hand. In other words, he called him out. Well, Duckett was not a gunfighter, or I can't remember what he did. I think he was a mechanic or something. He certainly wasn't a gunfighter, and nobody in Kennedy was. But anyway, so of course Dallas Husky had a pistol, and you didn't worry about a gun license back then. I mean, as far as I know, in Kennedy, Texas, if you wanted to carry, you carried. That's the end of that crap. I mean, and if the sheriff didn't want you to carry, you didn't carry. We'll get into more about the sheriff later on. But anyway, so they did. They met on Main Street. But Duckett came. Well, he was smart in a way, but he showed up with a shotgun, and he thought it was going to be, I guess you'd think, an honorable gunfight. Where you square off at 30 paces and fire. Well, it didn't work out that way for him. The way I heard the story was, I didn't eyewitness it. I was in town. I just didn't see it. But no, Dallas Husky rounded the corner by the First Nichols National Bank, and Husky was standing in the street about 20 feet away and just shot him. End of story. Was Duckett charged with anything? No. No crime there. Self-defense. But anyway, as far as I know, he never was, because nothing ever changed. He was a mystery character. Husky was always in and out of town. His wife was always there. She always drove a pink Cadillac. I'll never forget that. And her son was the same age I was. He was a sharp kid, always dressed to the nines. And here I was. My mother made my clothes, or made my shirts. We had feed sacks that had patterns on them. The feed. Sometimes we'd buy sacks of feed from the feed store. And the feed sacks themselves were material that you could use to make clothing with. I mean, they're pretty smart, right? So anyway, my mother made some clothes shirts for me out of those feed sacks, which I thought were really pretty, and they fit good. I mean, I thought they were really good. And but anyway, I remember at school, I was, let's see, started the first grade in 51. So by 52, 53, I was probably in the second, third, fourth grade. But anyway, I didn't really notice it in the early years, but later on I got to noticing it because some of the girls made fun of my shirts. I don't know why. I still don't know why. I thought they were pretty. But anyway, having said that, we'll end this. This gets us up to about 1955, and we'll kind of take up after that. But life was really simple, guys. I mean, you can't believe it. I mean, I threw in that little gunfight. That's what you call flavor in a book. Okay, that adds a little drama, I guess. But that was so rare. I mean, that happened one time. Was it a rough town? Hell no. Everybody lived in peace and harmony, and that one incident was a gnat and a tornado. That there was the Friendly Bar. There was another bar over on, I don't know, it was over by the railroad tracks. And I hung out in all of them. I played pool as a kid at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. At the age of 12 or 13, I was drinking beer. You just slap a quarter up there and they'd hand you a long neck. They didn't ask any questions. They didn't ask if you were 21 or care, And, I remember the old men would had those little cups, their little glasses to drink their beer out of, and they'd put salt in it. All right, I never did that, and I never have. I always wondered why they did. But yeah, dominoes was a big thing back then too. You could go in, everybody's playing dominoes, either dominoes, shooting pool, or they did gamble over at the Friendly Bar. And Main Street was the gossip street. There were some gossips in town. I won't mention their names, but of course every town, small town, has them. And believe me, the ladies, the newspaper. We had a newspaper called the Kennedy Advance. And there was no news in there that wasn't already out. All right, I mean the word of mouth was the news in Kennedy, Texas. But nobody locked their doors. The businesses did, because we had a night watchman that would double check, be sure the doors were locked at night. And I'm trying to close this out, so we'll end to 1955. But no, it was no one locked doors. And no one, your cars you never locked. You leave the keys in the ignition. Nobody stole anything. I mean, it just didn't happen. There might have been a burglary, but I never heard of it. But anyway, having said that, that gets us up to about 1955, and then we'll continue from 55 to 60 in the next deal. We'll do it in 5-year increments, and that way it'll get us through. And when we get to about 19, when I get out of high school, we'll close it out there. So we've got about 3 or 4 more videos maybe, and that'll take this whole volume and put it away. But for me, there's no pre-K, no kindergarten in Kennedy, Texas at that time. You started the first grade and moved forward. And that's it. There was no special ed. There was nothing. We had guys in high school that were 22 years old. Why? Because they had to pass exams to get out. And it was like getting out of prison. These guys couldn't figure it out. So anyway, I'm trying to close this out, and I keep thinking of stuff. But no, there was no automatic moving. There wasn't any pass-fail. You actually had to learn something to move forward, and that's the way it was. And maybe we still ought to consider that. Other than that, teachers were teachers too. I mean, you had to learn something. All right, you had a lot of memory work. As far as homework, not much of that really. They didn't load you up with homework. I don't remember much of that at all. Of course, I never did. I was in la la land, man. I was just having fun. Anyway, life was easy, guys. You can't go back, but it has changed unbelievably. I mean, Kennedy, Texas today is not anything like the town I grew up in. So anyway, we're through 1955, pretty close. I may throw in some flavor later, but thumbs up, carpe diem, adios, bye-bye. Buy USA Made when you can. Drink plenty of water. 3 or 4 quarts a day won't hurt you. Actually, it's good for you. It will help you get rid of gout. It will help you get rid of, you'll avoid kidney stones if you drink plenty of water. It'll also help you lose weight, because if you feel full from drinking a lot of water, you won't snack or won't want to snack. Take deep breaths, breathe into your nose, out through your mouth several times a day. Stretch, walk, do all your good stuff to keep your body in motion, and you'll live longer, you'll live healthily. And those are things you can control. You can drink water easily, you can stretch and do all those things on your own. Deep breaths. My mind's going, and my mouth's not keeping up. But anyway, enjoy your days, guys. Basically what I'm saying is keep your health. Bye-bye. Adios.